Good morning, everybody. So I'm very pleased to be here. I thank you for accepting the submission to this conference. Thank you for the introduction. So I've been in the brewing sector for a number of years, but today I'm just a student of political sciences. By the way, how many students are here? Raise your hand. Okay, so the future of brewing science doesn't look so bright, Catherine. So okay, so although I've been quite hidden at the Breweries of Europe, dealing with many issues, but I'm a believer of lifelong learning, so that's why I've been studying all over Europe, and my background also relates to tourism, because that was where I started to work, and this is something which I still develop in my writing, trying to combine beer, tourism, and economic aspects. So evolving all over. But this is not about my history, but about the history of taxation today and how it started. So Professor Sweeney made a very good introduction, but we should not forget that beer taxes are among the oldest taxes on beverages in the world. So we shouldn't complain. We are part of history. Those taxes in Egypt serve to finance temples building, but also finance war. So this has not changed in the Middle Ages, where taxes were mainly local, but still kept its role as to finance warfare. However, the local dimension of taxes has evolved and to become national. We heard that 50% of UK taxes came from beer. Poland, my country, had 30% income from beer taxation. So we see that this was an important revenue source, and this has kept itself as that. But other aspects came into taxation as health issues, which came over time, especially since 18th century in Great Britain, and this trend has been kept. Okay, but let's move to the future, or today, let's say. Beer taxation in Europe, it has been on the agenda for a long time. The first ever proposal came in the 70s, and it took over 20 years to agree on something. And that something are just two directives. Both of them are 4 pages long. So you see that it's a political compromise, and that framework, which was agreed in 1992, so is still valid today, and is only today, 20 years later, made as a is part of a European consultation on how to change it. Because the attempts that were taken in 95 and 99 didn't work out because of the common agriculture policy reform and the threat that wine taxation would change. There was an attempt to increase the taxes for most beverages, but there was, which happened during the EU presidency held by Finland, but there was a Czech minister who was very stubborn and stopped that. And the study that was done for the European Commission, how to change taxation of alcoholic beverages in 2010, remained a study. But 1992 was a long time ago, I think. So I was just starting secondary school. But since then, as we have heard, technology has evolved, market has changed. There was some more important role for the customs authorities, for the national courts, and also some country administrations also started to look more attentively what's going on in the beverages scene. Currently, we are having a European consultation, which started 10 days ago, but we are also in the process of other things which affect directly beer and other beverages, part is it of the administrative arrangements. Here I mean how all the paperwork related, or today digital work, related to transport of beer between breweries and tax warehouses works out. This is a very technical discussion, so I'm happy not to be engaged in that. What has changed as well was the administrative cooperation between tax authorities. Now they talk much more to each other and they exchange data much more often. So, well, maybe they should use that also in the financial area. And what we see are attempts of higher economic coordination. There was an announcement earlier this year to have a streamlined cooperation between the Council, the European Commission and national governments to have a common rules from in 2024 for tax calculation, tax receipts, and all that area. So, good luck, guys, but I'll be very happy to witness that. And what is very important is all the evolution in the digital and the consumer agenda. So these are areas which are indirectly related to what will happen also in the beverages market and in taxation as well. But, well, what we talk about. The EU framework is related to alcoholic beverages in one of the directives, and here we talk about beer, we talk about wine, we talk about fermented beverages other than beer and wine, mainly cider, and intermediate products, sherry, sports, and spirits. So this is in plain terms. In regulatory terms, this looks much more comprehensive. So here we see a very nice denomination of customs codes, of strengths that is comprised for different beverages and how they are classified respectively as basis for taxation. And those categories, in fact, determine the basis for taxes, so they're based on volume and strength among two of them, and just on volume on the other, which makes it very important when we tax products, because as you see, wine is taxed at 0 per whatever volume, whereas beer is taxed on volume plus its wort or alcoholic strength, and spirits as well. The ratio between beer and spirits is 1:3, and this comes in fact from a discussion which started in the 80s. When you see it from a health perspective, some may argue it's justified, but we haven't seen that evolution at all when it comes to the taxation regimes in different countries, which I will talk later. What was very important in the directive, and which is in particular relevant for brewers, was the setup of reduced rates based on production. Because this has allowed the existence of breweries of small sizes and having either a tax reduction or a progressive beer duty. Which is not the case for other beverages, because they receive their 0 rate. So what for? Simplify, this is the 4 articles related to beer are just fit just into one slide. So we have the options to use for taxing alcohol by volume, Plato. The rate must be above the minimum, which you just see, and you can use fractions, meaning steps of taxation. There are 4 countries like that use it, Belgium, for example, or the Netherlands, Spain as well. And in summary, this is the situation in Europe. We have 13 countries which use a wort-based system, whereas all the others use alcohol-based. This is very important because all the framework that has been evolving in Europe, all the new countries have based their legislation on the EU one. So for example, when Armenia, Albania, Croatia, when it was entering the EU, were reforming their tax legislation, they just use the EU directive, which makes it handy for trade. We can't deny it. However, what we have seen, very important, was the differentiation regarding the use of reduced rates. Thus, we have some countries which have a step-up approach, For example, Austria, which has levels up to 50,000 and above. So Luxembourg, which has up to 200,000. Whereas other countries simply give a 50% reduction, which is allowed by the directive, or other kinds of reduction for their beers. And we have seen countries which do not apply any reduced rate for breweries. However, if you look at those countries, Italy has seen a progression of small breweries, a large one. Also, we have seen that in Norway. So, which means that the tax regime per se is not the driver for setting up breweries. In some cases, whereas in the case of the UK, when it was introduced in 2001, that helped a lot for setting up new breweries. And we have also some residual reduced rate for for low alcohol beer, which. So when we see Europe has that kind of regime, but at world level we have seen something different. So for those who export beer, they see immediately how their beer is treated differently. So we have here countries which base by volume only, or by volume and strength, which is the EU framework. Some of them they base by the value of the beer, so which is very important when you regarding when you set up the price. So Malaysia, for example, I think is the record holder of the highest tax ratio compared to price. Canada is just behind. And we have also seen a discussion on reduced rates, which has been very different across countries. Australia had a very large tax debate in 2009, the so-called Henry reform, which from political science perspective is a failure of how to conduct a discussion on tax reform, because it was so much focused on health that it has forgotten how products should be taxed. So. And and we have seen also now a discussion in the US, but there is a paper wrote by Tamilan comparing US and EU situation on reduced rates, so I had to take out some slides. So, who wants to be a millionaire? So that's the question that asks probably every tax administration when it has problems with taxing products. So what we see is that they use when you play that game, so we are quiz lovers, what they use is they try to call a friend. What we have seen is that at world level there have been discussions regarding the customs classification, which is very relevant. As I mentioned, when you put a product in a specific category, then it has a different tax rate. And there has been a lot of going on. For example, there was a very known French beer with a lizard with tequila flavor, which has undergone, I think, 6 years of discussions at the EU customs level before receiving a special treatment. The harmonized system defining the customs rules have been also very relevant for that, and beer has not changed, luckily. But what we have seen is also cases at EU level, I quote Zeebrand or Paderborn, well, the same flavored beers received a different tax treatment because they were foreseen not as a beer but as a spirit, and this has also been going on for discussion. So whenever there is a problem, the national authorities look for help outside their national framework. Second option, 50-50. So if you have a system which is quite simple, you may also try to combine the best options that you have within. So we have Slovakia, which has been a country very innovative in terms of using a mathematical formula, which all taxes are, which is a mathematical formula where all alcoholic beverages are taxed at 100%, so a spirits taxation, but then they use a division formula, and funny enough, wine is taxed at 0. So, well, I leave it to mathematicians, but Norway has a system where they use, instead of wort strength, they use alcohol-based, but they use the same Plato bands as they could see as other countries like Belgium use for their taxation. Then we have also countries which have used wanted to help their national system of small breweries. Switzerland is a case where they used a reduction of taxes between 5,000 and 50,000 hectoliters and tax increases per 1,000 hectoliter. So the tax burden on any new brewery is much lower than in other countries because, well, you can calculate it much more easily. And we have seen also some aggressive approach by other tax administrations by topping up the tax. And France, well, made one with putting an additional tax for beverages above 18 beers, above 18 ABV. I think they were focusing mainly on one brewery coming from Scotland in this case. And UK, for health reasons, put an additional tax above 8.5 alcohol. And I remember when we were lodging this case against at the Commission towards the European Commission against the UK government, and the Commission simply said, as long as there's no economic evidence of harm, the system is right. So gather the evidence. So, and today, the Commission is asking the audience, how should we tax alcoholic beverages in the future? So there's a consultation running. As I said, it's open to everybody, so you may submit your views. But what is important here? The Commission is asking for the classification of products into the different customs categories as they are. There's one specific category, which is the cider one, other fermented beverages, which is the one which became a kind of trash category because everything can be other fermented beverages, and Germany has been experiencing that with some beers, milk stouts, if you talk about beer stouts. And also we have seen what they will be asking is about the reduced rates maintenance, whether they will be just for breweries or also for other beverages categories. So how do you compete then with wine, which has a reduced rate, and you have as well? So, and also there is a question about the own production and consumption. Now, when we see what is happening with the homebrewer scene, this is very important because all the discussion about contract brewing, which has emerged in the last years in Europe, will also be affected by this. So, if the rules are transparent and fine, well, then everybody will benefit from them, but we should be careful. So what we have seen in the last years, the trends that have occurred and will impact the discussion soon, is that the design of the system in 1992 was purely political compromise. So despite having discussions for 20 years, the directives were approved in 6 weeks. So, and written in 6 weeks. So then you think what was happening before. And this has an important aspect of interpretation of the text, because we have seen that the courts are coming in, and also the creativity that is happening within the system comes in, like the UK case. And also we have seen a lot of problems of classification of beverages between cider, with beer, and between all beverages we have added alcohol due to blending or other techniques. And also what is very relevant is that the update of the system will increase the competition between beverages. As we have seen that wine, spirits will also engage in the discussion, and also the health community. So therefore, if brewers do not position themselves correctly, they might end with a formula that is written on a napkin in a restaurant and not benefit from a good menu of options for taxation. Thank you.
Is there a country that ever calculated the social cost of alcohol use and alcohol abuse, and then based their taxation rate based on that cost, effectively, because that's one of the logic approaches that could be used.
Yes, in fact, as I mentioned, Australia and New Zealand were having a big discussion trying to put that element for taxation, but the only one that has such a developed system is Canada with the social reference pricing. Social reference pricing. And this system has been very much observed when the UK was putting its top-up approach. So whether to introduce an alternative like the Canadian system. A big discussion on how to use health for taxing was also occurring in the Asian countries. So Thailand in Southeast Asia. Thailand, for example, is a big driver for discussions on using health for taxation. And when we see those developments, they have an impact when it comes to discussions at the table, because the economic arguments, they fall out immediately. Technology has less impact, is moved elsewhere. So that's why, for example, in this case, we won't have a discussion about the tax rates, but rather the categories. And so very technical one, which is relevant because when Vietnam changed its rules for alcoholic beverages, wine immediately suffered. Russia, when it changed its technical rules for beer, well, I think those of you which were confronted to that might also have to change the recipes. But
very good talk. Just a comment, perhaps, for the benefit of the audience as far as the zero rating on wine is concerned. I think it's important to realize that most of the wine-producing countries in Europe actually have a zero rating. And the question is, of course, why do we have that zero rating? Firstly, of course, there is the crossover between the agricultural sector and people involved in that industry. And traditionally, a lot more people gained in terms of employment from the wine sector as did from the beer sector. And I think what we particularly find as brewers to be a little aggravating is that the fact that a lot of these countries are actually saying, no, don't get me wrong, we do have a tax rating on wine, but it's zero. Now that means basically if you're saying, well, next year we'll increase our tax by 3%, well, 3% of zero is still zero, which means basically you effectively uncoupling the wine sector from a meaningful discussion as to how to tax wine. And I think the only comment I wanted to make here, this is something that has happened in the last month, where as the first country, to our knowledge, the first and only country in the world with a zero rating on wine has actually now imposed a very low limit on a tax rate, and that's Malta. And you know what? I think given the amount of wine that Malta produces, probably not much, but I'm telling you, it's got its ripple effects throughout the European Union in terms of that. It's a good sign that's being said that alcoholic beverages should be taxed, and some are being taxed unfairly towards the others. Thank you.